So Ahmad, please stay on the line and we'll have some questions. Just remind the people asking the questions to identify themselves and identify who you'd like to answer the question.
Sure. My name is Bruce Cherish. I'm an associate professor of medicine at NYU Medical School. I've practiced medicine cardiology for the last 25 years. I've run cardiac care units for almost all that time and step-down units, and probably have taken care of 80,000 to 100,000 patients. And I still see large numbers of people on our monitoring floors. What I find interesting is that there just has not been in the real clinical world a concern about caffeine from coffee or energy drinks, in spite of the kind of bench research that we're hearing. And Dr. Higgins, you had some small sample sizes. One of your points was that adenosine was being blocked, but you know what? Adenosine is bad for the heart. We give people adenosine to make them ischemic, because adenosine dilates the healthy blood vessels. If you have a blockage, it doesn't dilate that, so it steals blood. So blocking adenosine actually sounds like a good cardiac factor, because you don't want to dilate the healthy arteries. So it's one thing for me to hear a lot of bench research, but this really sounds like this is a cure looking for a disease, because I just don't see this as a factor. And we have a lot of college campuses, and there's going to be disparate consumption of energy drinks. There are going to be people who binge on it. We're just not admitting people with arrhythmias. We're not admitting people with heart attacks. We're not seeing a disease. And I go to conferences around the country. I have friends. I just don't get it. I just don't see an illness here. So I'd just like you to explain to me, how are you translating these worries in bench research towards the real world? Because it's just not happening in my world.
Let's see what the panel thinks about that. John, you want to address that?
Well, I think that what we've heard today so far is that it appears that not all individuals are equal, and it appears there are different populations. Some may be vulnerable by age, by exposure to caffeine, and also now just in the last lecture genetically. There may be some genetic predisposition. So on the one hand, we have a substrate that is different, and then I think the exposure is different. I don't believe a coffee, which has many antioxidants and other things, is the same as pure caffeine, which I showed in my presentation. That was pure caffeine, that was not coffee. And that's not equal either to an energy beverage. So I think we've got a lot of mixed things coming together. And what we're trying to do in this meeting is to try to sort out some of this puzzle. And, I have individuals that work in pediatric cardiology that are seeing children coming to emergency rooms running into problems with this, more so than in adult cardiology. So it may be that the adult cardiologists out there are not seeing as much of this. Personally, I think that there is the under 18 is vulnerable for various reasons. And I think that's something that we have to really discuss at this conference. And I'm glad that we're getting some great dialogues out there. And obviously more research is needed, which is what we're trying to do as well, to unlock the key to why some individuals seem to be having more of a reaction and more adverse effects to particularly energy beverages and high caffeine level substances, and why others don't. But I want to make it clear that there is a different substrate and there is different exposures. And coffee is not equal to caffeine, is not equal to energy beverages. These are different beasts.
Jeff, did you want to make a quick comment?
Sure, just a quick comment. Clearly, the large population studies demonstrate that on a population basis, we don't see large differences in arrhythmia. Nevertheless, that's what I do. I see patients with arrhythmias, and you do come across occasionally patients who report sensitivity to caffeine. So, I think certainly the genetic polymorphisms, there are other factors that may identify particular individuals, small subset whether that it is, that may have some susceptibility to arrhythmias or other vascular effects.
Thanks. Next question?
Yes. My name is Thomas P. Davis. I'm professor of pharmacology, physiology, and neuroscience at the University of Arizona College of Medicine for the last 35 years. I'm also the chief scientific officer of Monster Energy for the last 35 years. I have a point I want to make, but it's a question as well.
Yeah, it has to be a question.
Issue number one, question. When you look at the dose of caffeine that you take from a hot beverage, that being twice the level of a Monster energy drink or a Red Bull energy drink or a classical energy drink that's high selling, you're looking at a beverage that's twice the concentration. Even if you're drinking it slower than the second beverage, which has half the concentration, which you're reaching half, drinking it faster, you're getting the same dose response. And I've been teaching dose response pharmacology 35 years. That's issue one. You need to remember that because that's an important concept of this chugging aspect versus drinking something slowly that you add milk to and you add sugar to and everything else. Issue number two, John Higgins presented some data on an N of 1, John. Your data on your endothelial cell. I've been doing endothelial cell work for 35 years in drug delivery and blood-brain barrier work. So I understand endothelial cells probably better than most people, being NIH funded since 1982 as well. You can't really look at tone data that you're presenting from an N of 1 without showing the true variation in your controls from an N of 1 person, and then draw generalizations to the product you tested on the N of 1 without replication, without peer review, and without going through that kind of critique. Because what it does is it presents really poor science. And this is the Institute of Medicine and the National Academy, where science is really held at a very much higher level than norm. So
let me
I
let
think it's
John
important.
address
It's
that.
important to note that what is the variation in the controls? A, B. What is the response to different doses of the Monster Energy drink in a large population or replicates of your own? And present that. And do you have that to present? That's the question.
Okay, John.
No, I thank you for your comments, and I think the comments are excellent comments. In terms of the N, the study that I showed prior to our research, if you recall, had 40 to 50 individuals in it where they actually measured exposure to an energy beverage and measured very well. And this was a very well-controlled and peer-reviewed study, showed clear evidence of endothelial dysfunction as measured by reactive hyperemia as well as platelet aggregation. So that study was done very well. There are other studies out there that I didn't show. I do agree. When I went on to the portion of my presentation regarding our research, I did state that the pilot work was done just purely on myself. That you are correct. That is an N of 1. However, we are starting the study when I return to the University of Texas, and we will be testing 50 individuals approximately and looking at before and after, as well as getting all of those measures of variation. And by the way, that N of 1, even though it was a pilot study, that was published in a peer-reviewed journal. So that has been published also. So I just wanted to bring that out. But I agree with you. However the data falls out, I'm just here to seek the truth. And whatever our data shows, we will publish that once we've done the study. And it may turn out, you may be correct, that there may be no effect, there may be an effect, or there may be a good effect. I don't know the answer, but I am hoping to find that answer on our study. But again, I'd like to reiterate the fact that I believe those the drinks are different. Energy beverages are very different to a cup of coffee, which is very different to pure caffeine. And I think we need to really differentiate those effects.
Okay, Steve?
Hi, Steve Lipschultz, Miami. Jeff, nice talk. Two sets of questions where I just want some clarification on what you presented. One was in some of your studies, like the Prius and the Myers, you spoke about VPBs in general. As a cardiologist, we consider some, such as runs of VT versus isolated VPBs with different prognostic information. Do you know, did these studies differentiate that, or if you look at those studies that just looked at VPBs that are associated with predictive value? You mentioned Bernie, and I learned a little bit of that from him. The second point is that as you reviewed all this important literature, were any of these studies, you know, today we heard a lot of talk that the FDA wants to hear about vulnerable populations. Were any of these in under 18? We also hear a lot about caffeine versus coffee versus energy drinks versus energy products. Was there a breakdown at all by that? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for those questions. Yeah, surprisingly, even Bernie Lowndes' study did not necessarily relate to the complexity of the ventricular ectopy. So they're really predominantly looking at PVC counts. There was the one study looking at inducible ventricular tachycardia and looking at non-sustained ventricular tachycardia as a subset of that. But in general, they're looking at PVC counts. The predominance of population studies are looking at coffee intake. So there is not really a lot of other information that's available. And certainly the same goes true with the vulnerable populations that you referred to. They're not really addressed in these studies.
So I think Dr. Alsami wanted to make a quick comment. Ahmed?
Yes, please. I wanted to respond to the previous question by the CSO from Monster regarding your first comment about the dose. And certainly you're right that certain cups of coffee will have much more caffeine than a can of Monster or another energy drink. But a can of Monster also has a lot more caffeine than other cups of coffee, depends on the size. But I think when it comes to dose, it's important to consider a number of factors. It's not just the amount that's consumed. Certainly a cup of coffee that has 200 milligrams, that is a higher dose than a cup of coffee with 100 milligrams. But if we're talking about peak plasma concentrations, which can have important physiological effects of pharmacokinetics, then a cold beverage that is chugged that does give a higher peak plasma concentration could have much more profound effects compared to one that is sipped more slowly. Even though it's a higher dose, it never reaches the same peak plasma concentration.
Okay, thanks, Ahmed. We got 3 more questions. If we could just do them very quickly.
Okay, just a quick question. My name is Dr. Bob Arnott. I'm a physician, consultant for Monster Energy, and for years have worked in exercise physiology, U.S. ski team, Lake Placid Performance Center. Also a endurance athlete. I just did the 32-mile paddle from Molokai to Oahu last Sunday. I've used energy drinks for years as a way of trying to increase my performance. I followed the research since Dave Kostel at Ball State, showing increase in performance, perhaps because it's sparing glycogen. And the question is, I mean, it seems like your research just flies in the face of decades of research showing that caffeine actually increases performance. You've seen it in bicycle time trials, to peak exhaustion, peak power, and whatnot. How do you take your data and contrast that with, again, decades of research on caffeine showing that it actually improves cardiovascular performance in elite aerobic activity? That's for John Higgins.
Thank you.
Quick answer.
As a fellow athlete.
No, thank you, and congratulations too. It's good to see. You know, Gandhi said, be the change you want to be in the world. So I appreciate the fact that you're setting a wonderful example for everyone with your exercise. Well, first, in answer to, I don't know, because my study that we're doing is actually looking purely at endothelial function before and then after a 24-ounce can of Monster, which contains 240 milligrams of caffeine, and then remeasuring it. So this is at rest. Our work that I'm doing is nothing to do with performance. So I know that there are definitely studies out there which show particularly, I believe around 6 milligram per kilogram, 3 to 6 plus or minus, exactly. Seem to have beneficial effects on skeletal muscle. I'm purely looking at effects on arterial function because I'm trying to get, see if I can figure out why it is that we're having some of these younger or vulnerable population groups who are consuming, 1 or 2 of these or other energy beverages and, dying suddenly. And to me, as a cardiologist, one of the things that we see with children dying suddenly is arrhythmia. And I'm trying to sort of get to why is that? And I don't disagree with your results. I mean, there's plenty of results about performance, but we're not actually studying that.
I should point out, there is no link, though, between these cases and sudden death. You take the Fournier case as an example, you have myocarditis. There is no link between caffeine and death from myocarditis.
We are over time.
Thank you.
So unfortunately, I know this is a really important area, but we also have other important areas that we need to address. So I'd like to thank the speakers, and we'll move on to the next section. Lynn?